Hey everyone, in today's video I'll be sharing with you one of my games where I had two minor pieces against a rook and a pawn in a slightly more unfavorable position, I would say, because my pieces are less active, less clear plans, and I have actually more weaknesses. So white in this position has the clear idea of doubling up on the only open e file with both his rooks and trying to target my weak d3 pawn and win it, and then maybe in the future infiltrate onto the second rank. Meanwhile, my position, I have two pawn islands on the queen side, so they really can't protect each other. White has a solid pawn chain on the queen side, and okay, as I mentioned before, he has clear plans to activate both his rooks. His bishop is nicely placed on the long diagonal, complementing his pawn structure. And meanwhile, my dark squared bishop is kind of stuck behind the c6 pawn. If I try to move the pawn to activate my light squared bishop, the dark squared bishop becomes stuck. And it's already kind of stuck right now trying to protect my knight, because if I ever end up moving my dark squared bishop, white has ideas of taking and ruining my pawn structure even further. And more importantly, I feel like my king is kind of awkwardly placed. I would like it to go away from the center of attention so my pieces could work together more easily. So looking forward, one key thing I would like to emphasize is how I still ended up actually outplaying my opponent and winning this game from, I would say, a worse position with the simple rule of piece activity. So what I ended up doing is in this game is creating clear plans for each piece and trying to find where they would best be happy. So going forward, my opponent played rook fe1, trying to gain control of the center, as I mentioned before. And here I play a5, and I would say a5 is actually one of the couple mistakes I make in this game. I was too worried about pawn structure at first, and I play a5 with the idea of trying to play a4, trying to soften up his pawn structure as well, create some weaknesses to target. However, I actually should have just first focused on activating my pieces, and then I could try to create weaknesses to target, because there's no point in trying to create weaknesses when your pieces aren't ready to start a fight yet. So here I should have probably just played a move like bishop c5 and accepted getting a worse pawn structure, but activating my rook through the g file and so on. Or maybe I should have played a move like rook 8, protecting my bishop so my king can move to c7, and then safeguard my king and activate my pieces the other way. Instead, a5 was kind of slow. Here my opponent plays rook e3 and I'm already losing another pawn. And this is when I realized I have to call off the a4 plan actually for now, and I should just focus on developing my pieces, and I play rook e8. So again, it's about having this mindset of, okay, accepting you've made a mistake like a5, I did waste a tempo, but now I have to focus. Just because I already wasted one tempo with a5 doesn't mean I should continue. So this is another important lesson to remember. It's about accepting your mistake and then, okay, rook e8, the idea is very simple. I want to keep my bishop protected so my king can next move just run to c7 and b6. Here he takes my pawn on d3 and I play king c7 and bishop e5 check, b6. So I've managed to get my king to the queen side, where it'll be holding on to both these pawns, and it'll be looking at white's pawn structure, making sure they really don't advance, and okay, my weaknesses are safeguarded for now. White plays king f1, which I wouldn't say is the most accurate plan. Maybe if he wanted to bring his king in, he would play f3, restricting my knight, and then king f2. And before this, honestly, he should just play rook e1, bringing in his other rook as well. But he plays king f1, and that gives me more time to basically activate my pieces. In this position, I realized instead of trying to move my pawn, I should just spend like 3 moves bringing my bishop to the other side of the board, where it would actually be more active. So I start with bishop b7. Now he plays f3, trying to restrict my knight, and I just continue with my plan, bishop b7, bishop c8, and bringing my bishop to the other board, activating it. And here my opponent plays rook e3, and this actually allows me to gain more tempo, activating my second bishop by hitting his rook. Now he does have time to take on f6, and I don't have to worry about ruining my pawn structure, because I would be grabbing his rook here, and this is winning for black. So instead he has to move his rook, but instead of that he played d4 in the game, trying to advance his pawn chain and create some sort of trouble for me. But in this position I use the fact that the pawn is pinned to the rook, so I played this tactic, rook takes e5, to simplify a bit more and basically trade some of his active pieces and basically giving me more time. The idea here is if he takes my rook with the pawn, I'll take his rook, and once he takes my knight back, I don't even have to take back with my pawn. I can play a move like bishop d4, attacking his rook with tempo first, and once his rook moves, I'll take with my bishop on f6, and I have two bishops for the rook and pawn, and usually a bishop pair work together really nicely, so I should manage to hold on to a draw here at the very least. And if he plays a move like rook takes e5, I can win back the exchange with bishop takes d4. And here, okay, let's say he plays a move like rook a1, a simple trade. And in this position, it's important to play the move bishop e6, and then I would say it's perhaps equal. If I didn't play bishop e6 and played another random move, white would be getting in rook e7, and that would be kind of dangerous because I allow his rook onto the 7th rank where it has lots of control, and then maybe he can consider playing moves like g4, g5, kicking my knight out, bringing his king in, and creating some sort of mess on the king side where he can later create a passed pawn. And I really don't have too much counterplay on the queen side with this pawn structure. So it's important to block his rook from accessing the 7th rank and infiltrating and playing bishop e6. So this is another key idea you should remember when playing against the rook. So anyway, going back, there's the third option which happened in the game where he takes on c5, and once I take back with my rook isn't really that well placed, and I have to spend another move bringing it back into the center. However, I did manage to trade his dark squared bishop and get into some sort of active position. Here he plays rook d1, and as I mentioned before, I should have played bishop e6, and that would have been a nice move, immediately cutting off his rook. Instead, I would played a4 first, which I would say is a bit inaccurate, but honestly not too bad. Here white could have perhaps capitalized by bringing his rook to the 7th rank immediately, and he would probably be slightly better here. But okay, he didn't do that as well, and he played rook d4. So both of us honestly made kind of back-to-back inaccuracies. And then here I trade and I play rook a5, basically trying to gain access to another open file and infiltrate and create threats of my own, cutting off his king. Here he plays rook d8, which I'd say again is sort of the wrong move order. Here white should be fine if he plays a move like rook e7, infiltrating and then forcing me to play bishop e6 next. And yes, my pawn chain is protected for now, but my bishop is kind of tied down to protecting f7, and now he can start infiltrating with the other rook, and both rooks are coming in. But instead, he plays the rook d8, the other rook first, and I play bishop e6, and I don't allow this rook to come in. So now I would say black is already kind of better off. He's got more of his pieces into nice squares as well, and I have clear plans of basically cutting off the king and maybe walking forth my king in the future to put more pressure. He plays g4 with that idea of trying to play h4, g5, and perhaps kind of harass my knight and see where it goes, because it's kind of restricted by white's pawn structure. But I always have the d7 square at the very least. So I continue to play rook a2, further activating more of my pieces and keep making sure white's king doesn't come into the game. And here white plays rook e2, trying to challenge my rook immediately and trying to bring his king in. But now his pawn structure, queenside pawn structure, is open for targeting. So I play rook a3 back, hitting his pawn on b3. And here he could have played a move like rook b2, or yeah, he should have played a move like rook b2, I guess, trying to protect his pawns. But he played king f2, I guess, basically allowing me to take on b3. But first allowing me to take on b3 in the future. If I take immediately, he actually has this check, winning my rook. So it's defended by tactics. But I play king c7, and okay, next move I'm trying to take, and he really has no good way to protect his pawns. He played rook d3 in the game, but as I mentioned before, I can take this pawn on b3 in the future. Not the b3 pawn in this case, but the c4 pawn. One of the pawns was gonna fall because This b3 pawn is pinned to rook, and now I'm also skewering both of his rooks. He tries to escape with a check. I play king b6, and he plays rook d4, but by now I already won a pawn back, and my pieces are honestly really active. I simply go back, and I'm threatening to take on b3 next. He gives this check, I activate my king further, and then I take the pawn. And he honestly didn't have any good ways to protect it in the first place. And he tries to create some counterplay with g5, but at this point I'm basically already winning. I have a passed pawn, and both of my pieces are really active. And rook e7, both of his rooks are on the edge, and they're not really doing much at this point. I bring my king back, trying to create a clear path for my pawn, and the game goes on. Honestly, I didn't play that accurately. We were on low time, but as you saw so far, I really just focused on getting my pieces active, and at the end of the day you can see how this worked out, and I managed to gobble up all his queenside pawn structure. If you look earlier, if you go back, his queenside pawn structure looked pretty menacing, and my pawn islands were kind of weak, but I managed to trade it off with ideas like a4, softening it up, and bringing my rook in this way, and basically creating some sort of squeezing his king. And this is what I want you all to do in your games. Basically, look at one each piece at a time and slowly try to bring it into play. First, I looked at the light squared bishop and I brought it into play, then my dark squared bishop, and then my rook, and slowly so forth. And yeah, that's it for today's video. Hope you learned something about piece activation, and see you next time. Bye.